Robin Hood was released in 1973 and was directed by Wolfgang Reithermann and is the 21st Disney animated feature film and is based on the legend of Robin Hood and tells the story of a legendary British outlaw as he steals from the rich and gives to the poor while Prince John wishes to take over all of England. Guys, I'm excited to finally talk about Robin Hood because we finally reached that point within the transitional era, or as many know it as the Dark Age of Disney. That is kind of where everything comes to a head, I think personally, because Robin Hood is the quintessential example of a film from this era. Because previously we had films that were verging near the end of the Silver Age and into this era that were using the Xerox processing, a cheaper way of producing animation. And we have been talking about each of these movies lately and how scratchy the animation is and how they recycle some scenes from other Disney films. And then we have Robin Hood here, which is notorious for being the worst offender of this. This is probably one of the cheaper Disney movies. It doesn't look as cheap as the Aristocats did. The Aristocats was really scratchy in a lot of places, but Robin Hood is maybe a little smoother, but it definitely copies a whole lot more. In fact, I would call Robin Hood a copy and paste kind of film, because I'm going to be showing some footage here, but Robin Hood takes from many other different Disney films, takes that animation, rips it, and then animates the characters over top of it. And when you put it side by side, it is incredible that this ever happened. And this is a lot in a way. I don't want to blame Wolfgang Reithermann, but he is credited as the sole director of many of the early films in the transitional era. And so I feel like there's this cheapness to a lot of them, and this idea of wanting to get stuff produced in time, cheaply and effectively. And it worked because Robin Hood was a success financially, not necessarily critically, which when this film released, it received pretty mediocre reviews, but has gotten some much more love in the future, as people have kind of, gotten past a lot of the problems that the film has. But I still ultimately find this movie kind of bland, and I will get into that. But first, I do want to briefly mention about the creation of this film in general. This is the first Disney animated film that had no input from Walt Disney, so they are starting fresh. This wasn't planned while he was still alive or anything, but it has elements that Walt Disney was originally intending in many ways, such as a combination of Reynold the Fox, which was something that he was thinking of around the time of Snow White, and then also the story of Robin Hood. And basically, Wolfgang Reithermann and the animators and storytellers in this film just kind of combined those two elements together to produce this film. And I think for the most part, even though I'm not the biggest fan of this film, I think this is a pretty solid enough adaptation of Robin Hood. I think it gets the story beats across very well with, for a younger audience to understand who Robin Hood is. And in fact, when you think of all the Robin Hood adaptations, there's a few that do stand out. But I bet you that one of the most iconic ones is probably this one. The one with Robin Hood being a fox. And I think that is really just a testament as to how good Disney was at creating such iconic character design. And the design of all the characters here is really good. Even if Little John is just a reskinned Baloo, it's still wonderfully done and is great in that regard. I think it just tells the story in a very entertaining way. For the first half, you kind of go through the beats of the story of Robin Hood giving to the poor, stealing from the rich, and there's other elements too, such as the archery tournament, which is a famous scene in most of the legends of Robin Hood. And that stuff is really, really entertaining and a lot of fun. And in fact, the humor is very infectious with this. This is a very funny movie, and I laughed quite a bit throughout it. But also, it's a film that has a really good score. The soundtrack for this is different from a lot of the films that came out previously and during the transitional era because it's folk. And I am a huge fan of folk music, and it makes it very memorable. And the music really stands out, in particular the opening theme with Robin Hood and Little John running through the forest. That is a very iconic song that has been used throughout commercials and stuff. And so it's funny watching this movie that at the time was considered very mediocre, and in some ways is still considered mediocre, have a lasting legacy of sorts with its iconography and also just the music in general. And everybody remembers Robin Hood the Fox, more or less. I also really enjoy the performances in this, particularly the person playing Sir Hiss, who, again, is just a reskin of Kaa from the Jungle Book. In fact, he does the same, eye thing, hypnotizing. But the best performance, by far, is Peter Ustinov as Prince John, who is fantastic. He's like a man-child. There's also, I think, a pretty queer reading that you can get out of Prince John in this, which I found very fascinating in particular. And overall, he just knows how to be a very bombastic, larger-than-life kind of character, and I think that's what makes Prince John so memorable in this. I think the film does falter in its second half, though, and kind of has the same problem that I had with The Sword in the Stone, where The Sword in the Stone has a really fun first half, but after about 45 minutes into the movie, you're kind of done, and it's just not becoming as engaging. And I really felt bad because the climax of this movie was going on, and it's entertaining, but I just didn't care at that point. There's something about it that still feels generic, that feels a little lifeless, which is sad because there was so much writing on this, and I do feel bad for a lot of the animators and people that worked on this film, because obviously a lot of heart went into this, and it's just kind of disappointing that without true guidance and having Wolfgang Reithermann at the helm, I think they kind of released a product that was not going to be perfect. And in fact, this is the last film that Wolfgang Reithermann would basically direct as sole director. He had done all of this since Sword in the Stone or 101 Dalmatians, and then here we kind of see the worst of his sentiments put to screen, and I think that's why at the end of the day I'm not the biggest fan of this movie, but it is really enjoyable in a lot of ways, and it has some things that are great to listen to, such as the music. The characters are fun, the humor is great, but there's just parts of it that really hold it back, and it has memorable, character designs, but the film itself just kind of falls flat. which is kind of, really disappointing, because when you watch a Disney film, you want to be enraptured in what you're seeing. There's just something always there, an iconic moment, an iconic scene. And there are moments in here, but they just don't stand out like others. But it's still good, nonetheless. It's just not one of my favorites. So anyway, with all that said, I'm going to give Robin Hood a 6 out of 10. I wanted to enjoy this more, and I feel like I have in the past. I feel like I'm going to be going back and forth with this film in the multiple times that I end up rewatching it through the years. So I could rewatch it a few weeks from now and like it a whole lot more, or I could like it a whole lot less. Who knows? But I do think it is worth watching. It is an important part of the Disney animated catalog, and it's definitely a film that is kind of the worst of all of the problems that came with the Xerox processing and the transitional era, or the Dark Ages. People mostly refer to this era as. But that's all I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I am sorry that it has been such a long time since I've done a review on this channel, because there's been a lot going on from work to school, and I've just been really busy. But I hope to get back on track, and I might even do a few extra Disney reviews to get back on track to where I was, and then also do some more reviews for you that I hope you'll enjoy. But that's all I've got for you, so as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.